Hello, it's Monday and we're talking about boundaries again. This is week 3. I've been kind of painting this picture of how good fences make good neighbors, right? So we build a fence and say, these are my boundaries, and it helps us to really create great relationships with others. So today I want to talk about fence jumpers, and I want to talk a little bit about what may come up for you as you start to set boundaries, and I want to give you some strategies for how to maintain those boundaries with the fence jumpers. So, what's a fence jumper? So, as we start to set boundaries, there will be people in our lives who say, "Oh, that boundary's not for me. She couldn't possibly be setting a boundary for me. I'm her mother, her sister, her best friend, her daughter, her boss, the lady who lives next door. She couldn't possibly be setting a boundary for me." And they will just come right over, come right in the boundary, and you'll be like, "Whoa, I thought I told you X," and they'll be like, "Oh, you didn't mean that for me." Probably, if you have people in your life like that, you definitely meant it for them. So what do you do? Let me talk a little bit about what may come up for you when you first start setting boundaries. And I talk a lot about this on my blog. I give some kind of lists and breakdowns as well today, so leahfarmer.com. But what may come up for you as you start to set boundaries is guilt and fear of rejection, a sense of selfishness and self-doubt. The little voice in your head may say, I shouldn't have to set boundaries. This is selfish. It's unnecessary. These people love me. It's not selfish. It is necessary, and they may love you, and they may be unboundaried. So you are teaching people how to treat you. And when you're reteaching people how to treat you, they may need some encouragement to follow the rules and stay on their side of the fence and let them less invited in. The other thing that may come up for you is external guilt, right? So you may have some internal stuff you're dealing with, and externally people may start to say to you, I can't believe you're doing this now. I don't understand why we need boundaries. Why are you changing the rules? Why are you behaving like this? You may get some pushback. You may get some stonewalling. You may just get some different reactions. Again, that does not mean that you shouldn't have boundaries. It probably, once again, means you definitely need them. So just a comment. So that it can be internal to you. It can also come externally at you. So be aware of that. That is very normal. And it's something because you're learning and the other person is learning. Something I just want to mention, I don't want to go super deep here, but if you have a trauma background, if you have PTSD, an abuse background, anything that gets really triggered by kind of having interpersonal relationships where there's not a lot of boundaried behavior, you may get triggered when setting boundaries. So just be aware of that and make sure you get the support you need. It's very, very natural if you have that kind of background. I have that kind of background. So when I first started learning to set boundaries, everything in me would sort of clench up and I would think, ooh, I can't do this. And I would get a little hypervigilant and things would happen. So I just want to call that out and mention it in case for those of you who have that kind of background, just be aware of it and make sure you get the support you need from the people who you get support from around your trauma. Okay. And if you need a referral or some help, let me know. I'm happy to do that. So let's talk about some ways that some techniques you can use. These are called assertiveness techniques that you can use in setting boundaries and maintaining them. So I want to talk a little bit about, I'm going to turn my notes on just so that I make sure I get the wording right. So everything we do should include the assertive pause. So the assertive pause is a fancy way of saying, take a breath. When you're dealing with someone who's jumping your fence, right, and you're trying to have a conversation, give yourself permission to take a pause, right? Sit with that pause, take a deep breath. You can be in the midst of conflict with them and you get quiet, take a deep breath, consider what you're about to say, and then start talking. One thing to do when dealing with assertive pauses is to maintain assertive posture, right? Eyes forward, eye contact, shoulders back, spine straight. You don't want to shrink down into yourself when dealing with the assertive pause because that tends to make aggressors move forward. And you don't want to do that. Even with people you love, maintain some dignity of posture, right? It's a very, very important part of this. So after you've taken the assertive pause, there are a few tools you can use. As I talked about last week, you can use I statements, right? So instead of being like, you always do this and you always do that, You want to use some I statements. I want this. I'm confused. I'm concerned. I need this line not to be crossed. Like, you want to really go with I statements instead of you statements. There's a couple things that I think can be really, really, really helpful. And I've used all of these in some form or fashion. So one of them is called negative inquiry, which is very similar to the I statement. So negative inquiry says that instead of saying, "You are so rude," when you start arguing with someone, you may try something like, how can you explain to me how this reaction is coming up for you, right? Or, you always want things your way. Can be, do you have any suggestions for how we can both get what we need, right? So it's, instead of coming in super hot with the yous or with an accusation or a question that comes out really harsh, right? Try asking a question that opens the dialogue back up and staying as neutral as possible, right? In terms of your tone and approach. So that's one option. There is another option that is called fogging, which will piss people off if they're really, really, really aggressive, but it can work. So you'll have to practice this. And if you want to practice, I would be happy to practice with you. Fogging is when you're in this conflict discussion about boundaries and the other person is really coming at you, and you take an assertive pause. I understand where you're coming from. You have a valid point. But you never give up your position, right? So you can assert that you see their point of view, that you understand where they're coming from, that they have a valid concern, and then you repeat the boundary. I don't want you to borrow my things. I don't like it when you borrow my things without my permission, right? So let's just imagine that boundary. Well, the person comes at you super hard. I don't know why I have to ask your permission. It's there. You're not using it. You have a valid point. I am not using it. And still, I want you to ask me before you borrow my things. Do you understand? And no matter how many versions of what they come at you with, you can say, I hear you, and I understand why you feel that way. And I want you to ask me before you borrow my things, right? So hard, but with consistency, you can really nail the point that I hear you and I'm not changing my perspective, right? And that can be a really healthy way to deal, especially with these really aggressive people, hardcore. They won't like it and they'll be like, growl. You're trying to use psychology on me. I'm not. I'm telling you that I hear you and that I understand, and I'm not changing my position. So that's a big one. The broken record is very similar, the broken record approach or technique. So this is like, I state my boundary super clearly, and no matter what you say, I just keep going back to the same phrase. Again, this can drive someone crazy, but it's very, very effective. So I'm not going to work on Saturday. I have plans. Person's like, I need you to work. This is what's going to happen if you don't work, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to work on Saturday. I already have plans and I'm going to do what I agreed to do with my family and friends. And it's just this, I'm sorry, I'm looking at my notes to make sure I'm not missing anything. You don't need to justify it. You don't owe them an explanation. You don't owe them an alternative. A lot of times what we do, the person says, I need you to work on Saturday. And we're like, I can't work on Saturday. I have plans. Well, I need you to work on Saturday. Okay, well, I don't work weekends. That wasn't part of our agreement. Yeah, but I need you to work this Saturday. And a lot of times what we'll do is say, I could work in the morning, or I could work on Sunday, or what if I put in extra hours on Friday? Unless that is something you want to do, don't make alternatives. You don't need to explain. I wouldn't even go down this is not part of our agreement. You told me I wouldn't have to work. I wouldn't do any of that. I would say, I'm not going to work on Saturday. I already have plans. I probably actually would say, I'm not going to work on Saturday. Full stop. But I understand that for some of us, that would be really jarring to be that direct. But it's sort of the you know, I'm not going to have this conversation that I mentioned last week. I'm not interested in this. I have a pretty strong, like, just say it really simply and just keep saying it. And people are like, I don't know what to do with this. And often they will back away, but they will respect the boundary. They may come hardcore with the next thing and you'll have to do it again. But you are teaching this person with the broken record, after you've tried the assertive pause, after you've tried fogging, after you've tried I statements, the broken record says you are not going to get a different sentence. So move on. So these are some techniques for how to handle boundaries. This was a long video, I totally know, but I think this is where the rubber meets the road. Like, it's one thing for me to stand back and talk to you about setting boundaries, but this giving you understanding about what may come up for you and then working through some actual techniques. I think this is where the important stuff is. So we'll do one more week on boundaries next week. If you have any questions, if you have any concerns, if you think, oh, Leah's full of it, let's talk about that. I'm totally open to that. If you need someone to partner with you in setting boundaries and to practice with, I would be happy to do that from a coaching perspective. If you need a referral because you have a kind of a trauma trigger going on here, let me know. I have some friends that are in that field, and so they can help you. Either way, your boundaries are valid and you don't have to explain them to anyone. So keep the fence jumpers out. Have a good week.